Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's presentation on building a high-trust workplace culture. This event is part of SHRM's webcast series. You can see a list of available and upcoming programs at shrm.org/webcast, and you can get details of new and upcoming webcasts from SHRM's e-newsletters, including HR Daily and HR Week. Before we get started, we want to provide you with some information about today's program. SHRM would like to thank our program sponsor, Great Place to Work, for helping make this webcast available to the HR community. And now about this presentation. Creating and nurturing a differentiated high-trust culture is your company's path to improved employer branding, strong financial performance, lower voluntary turnover, and enhanced innovation and agility. Today's program looks at characteristics of a high-trust culture and how you can adapt them to your workplace. To lead our program, we're pleased to welcome Sarah Lewis-Kulin from Great Place to Work and Justin Angsuwat from Thumbtack. Here's a brief introduction to our speakers. Sarah Lewis-Kulin is Vice President and Senior Editor of Recognition Programs at Great Place to Work. She's been part of the Great Place to Work team for 17 years, developing the organization's intellectual property. She's also held publishing roles with publishers such as Random House. Justin Angsuwat is the Vice President of People at Thumbtack. He leads all people operations, including HR, recruiting, learning and development, compensation and benefits, workplace experience, and culinary. Mr. Angsuwat was previously the head of HR at Google for its go-to-market organization and a member of the Google People Operations Leadership Team. He's also led human capital consulting teams at PwC and was the HR Chief of Staff at a Fortune 500 during one of the largest corporate transformations in the world at that time. Mr. Angsuwat also served as chair of SHRM's Young Professionals Advisory Council. With introductions complete, we're ready to get started, and I'm pleased to turn over the webcast microphone to our first speaker, Ms. Sarah Lewis-Kulin.
Well, thanks so much for that introduction. I'm really happy to be here today with our friends at SHRM and also at Thumbtack to talk about a subject that I've become very passionate about over the last 17 years working at Great Place to Work, which is why and how to build a high-trust culture for everyone at your organization. And what I wanted to do is start off quickly and give you a little context about the data that I'm going to share with you. It comes from my work at Great Place to Work. We are a global research and consulting firm that surveys tens of millions of employees around the world each year, and we operate in over 40 countries around the globe. In the U.S., most of you are probably most familiar with the many best workplaces lists that Fortune publishes, for which we do the research and the selection, including the Fortune 100 Best Companies to Work For list, and also several others that recognize companies that are uniquely strong in their industry, or how they treat women, or how they give back to their communities, for example. And actually just this last year, we started doing a list with People magazine that brings great recognition to companies that care as well. But ultimately, what Great Place to Work is really focused on is wanting companies to be successful in creating great workplaces. So in the 30 years that we've been in business, we've worked closely with companies across all sizes and industries around the world to help build and recognize winning company cultures that improve the employee experience, that maximize everyone's human potential in the organization, and which ultimately drives business results. So it's great to be here today talking with Justin because Thumbtack earned a place on our Best Small and Medium Workplaces list this last year for their excellent work in building a high-trust culture, all the while under really demanding pressure of creating the world's largest services marketplace. So what we're going to cover today is I'm going to share what is a high-trust culture, why would you want to build one, and how would you go about doing it. Justin is then going to tell you what this actually looks like from the inside at Thumbtack, and then we're going to leave some time for Q&A. So what is a high-trust culture? It all comes down to trust. So when you have a workplace that's defined by high-quality, trusting relationships, you're going to see higher levels of employee engagement, higher innovation in your organization, higher productivity, and many more benefits. But it takes several key components to build trust in an organization. First is the credibility of leadership. Leaders need to communicate well with all levels of the organization. They need to be really excellent at their jobs, and they need to follow through and do what they say that they will do. Employees also have to be treated consistently with respect, both as individuals and as employees, in both the formal policies and programs you have in your organization, as well as just their everyday interactions. And finally, employees must feel that there's a level playing field for them, regardless of who they are or what role they perform in the organization. And in addition to those three components that, oops, I didn't mean to click forward there. In addition to those three components that build trust, we also have found that employees must feel proud of their work and of the work of the organization. That needs to feel like a really strong connection for them. And there has to be a strong sense of teamwork. People need to have a good sense that they can bring their whole selves to work and really enjoy their colleagues. But it's not enough for that experience just to be the average experience in the workplace. You need to make sure that you can consistently have this experience regardless of who you are or what you do for the company. You don't want to be sitting next to a colleague who performs a different job or has a different background as you and see that they have a different experience in the workplace. Trust has to be consistent in order to create a best workplace and a great workplace. So some of you might be thinking that having a high-trust workplace sounds like a nice to have, that sure, people would like to work in a positive and supportive environment, but is this really necessary in order to have organizational success? So I wanted to walk you through some of the business benefits that we've found as we've studied a number of different companies throughout the world. And the first thing that we've found is that great workplaces for all are also great workplaces, great places to make money. We've found that companies that score in the top quartile for being a great place to work for all employees also see 2 to 3 times the revenue growth of those in lower ranking companies. We've also looked at what's happening behind the scenes to impact those results. So clearly there's less voluntary turnover in staff. We found that people are 13 times more likely to want to work for a long time at companies in high-trust cultures. And clearly we all know the benefits that's saved in recruiting and training costs, not to mention lost productivity from having key positions unfilled. But another benefit is increased innovation behaviors. And certainly that helps your product development, but it also impacts operations, facilities, customer support, and many other teams. Essentially, everyone, regardless of your industry, needs to employ people who are good at finding better, smarter, faster ways to do work and solve problems. And what our data has shown across the countries and companies that we've studied is that people are 20 times more likely to exhibit innovation behaviors when they work in a high-trust culture. A third benefit is brand ambassadorship, and clearly word-of-mouth referrals are a powerful source of new and repeat business, and employees tell their friends and families and neighbors and even strangers, certainly with the power of social media, about their high-trust workplaces and what it offers. And what we found is that employees are 8 times more likely to help you build your brand in great workplaces. I know that smaller companies sometimes wonder if creating a great workplace is beyond their budget or even a worthy focus for them, but these benefits that we're talking about apply as much to them as they do to any organization. And here are the results of some analysis that we did that focused solely on companies with fewer than 1,000 employees. You can see here that employees' intent to stay becomes more and more affected by whether it's a great place to work as the company is smaller. Employees' willingness to recruit their friends and colleagues to work for you is over 100 times more likely in companies that would have fewer than 1,000 employees, and it's a great place to work. And you can also see that innovation and customer service quality are critical to the sustainability and growth of any smaller company and are very positively affected when employees say that it's a great place to work. So now that you've seen some of the very tangible benefits of a high trust culture, how do you go about creating that higher level of trust throughout your organization? And so if you come away with just one thing from this webinar, please remember that trust is the key to creating a great workplace. So what happens sometimes with the lists that we produce is that companies review the lists of the best workplaces and then use them as a checklist of what programs to implement in their workplaces. I hate it when I see this happen because it won't work. For every company that we see that has a chef on site or is paying back employees' tuition loans and makes the list, behind the scenes, we are seeing another company that's doing the same thing but doesn't make the list. And the difference in those cases is always whether trusting behaviors are in place day to day in that environment. You simply can't give people a nice benefits package and expect them to overlook whether they're feeling respected as professionals and individuals every day, the rest of the week, and the rest of their lives. So rather than adopt what works for another company, you need to understand what specifically drives trust in your culture. You need to survey your people or conduct focus groups, however you feel you can get really accurate information. And you need to attach that understanding to the metrics that drive your business success. And that's going to help you understand where to focus and will also be a really practical strategy to get the support of your leaders to sustain those efforts. And the best programs are going to work because they reflect your specific culture. So just as a small, silly example, there's an awards program that I know of that's run by an engineering company filled with scientists, where people get to hold on to a rock a month because they rock, and their employees love it, right? Because it fits their scientific, goofy culture to a T. It feels really personal to them, and they fight for the opportunity to hold this rock and be the employee who rocks for a month. But can you imagine how this would go over in most companies if you said that, your key recognition program is you get to hold a rock? But it's really personal and unique to them, and it works amazingly in their culture. And of course, I should say it's not the only way that they do recognition in their organization. So make sure you do things that really reflect what's unique about your culture and your people. The other thing is that programs should show a deep understanding of the real needs of your employees. And so just another example, I know of another company, construction organization, that's largely made up of married men. And HR realized that their wives were making all of the benefit programs decisions and didn't have the information really necessary in order to do that. So they invited wives and families into their offices for all the HR benefits presentations. And this was, again, something that employees loved because it showed them that their leaders really saw who they were and what their lives were like. And that's not, a fancy perk, but it was one small piece of a total palette of the way this construction company showed up for its people and really understood who they are. So finally, I would say that you need to make sure that you reduce transactions and increase gifts. And this is a key way to think about really almost all the programs you're doing in your organization. Maybe not salary, but everything else. And this is about being generous in your benefits. Looking at your programs as more than just an exchange for service. So as another example, you can imagine in one company just an employee having a 5-year anniversary, and in one company the manager congratulates the employee in their kind of regular one-on-one meeting that they're holding anyway. HR mails a 5-year service award pin to the employee's house, and there's some kind of internal communication that lists the anniversary in the company newsletter. Now, that's not a bad thing. Those are all really nice things. that you can compare it to another company where just some small changes are made that makes it feel more personal to the employee. So the manager might announce the anniversary to the entire team and circulate a specific congratulations letter for all of coworkers to sign. And HR might give the 5-year pin to the manager, who instead of mailing it to the home, personally presents it to the employee with a small gift that might be personalized, maybe their very favorite chocolates or something you know that that person loves. And then the division head could give the employee a shout out at the all hands meeting, and the manager might share several of their unique accomplishments. So it goes from feeling like, you know, this is a standard process that everyone's getting the same thing to something that really feels like they're recognizing that unique individual. And neither approach takes a vastly different amount of money. It's just about showing up in a different way to that individual. Okay, so you know, as I said, the most important thing really is to focus on trust and build programs that are generous expressions of that trust and support all your employees that are really unique to who they are. But before I turn this over to Justin, I also just wanted to quickly share with you that what works as your one size is going to change as you grow. And so you should certainly always analyze your culture to understand what needs to happen and what's driving your workplace culture specifically for you. But I wanted to share quickly that some of what we've seen in our studies is that with each doubling in employee size, certain experiences are at risk of dropping much more precipitously than others. And those experiences are going to affect your culture and your business performance. So you can see on this slide, what we've found is every time the number of employees in a company doubles, there's a precipitous drop in employees' confidence in executive judgment, in how willing they are to participate in innovation, and also in their experiences of fairness, particularly in whether there's politics in the workplace and whether the promotion decisions are being handled fairly. And this is important because all of these we know are strongly correlated to positive revenue growth in an organization. And if companies don't pay attention to this, they're at risk if it's not well managed. So one other thing that we've found is that creating a great place to work is particularly influential on smaller companies' retention. So this chart, I showed you a few different variations of this, but this chart focuses on what the experience is at companies with 100 or fewer employees. And what we found is that barely anyone, that number there that's really small is 1.5%, barely anyone plans to stay with a company with fewer than 100 employees if it isn't a great place to work. That factor is improved 63 times when it is a great place to work. So there's a huge ROI for smaller companies on creating a great place to work with retention of their people. And interestingly, some of the top drivers of retention at small companies are whether it's a friendly place to work and whether people care about each other. And I think that puts a lot of the camaraderie building programs that small companies tend to have in a different light, and you can really see the particular value of some of those simpler camaraderie building programs. In contrast, at larger companies, what we found is that there's less volatility in whether employees plan to stay at the company, whether it's a great place to work or not. Certainly there's a significant improvement if it is a great place to work. And also there's a downside even to having less volatility, because you don't want to have, if you'll forgive me for saying, just cheeks and seats, right? You want people to be there because they really want to be there and not just have dead weight in your organization. And so you really want to be creating a great place to work to open that up. But what's affecting the retention drivers in larger companies is employees' ability to still feel that they have an impact on the organization. They need to feel that they make a difference and that they're proud of their accomplishments. And so, you know, a lot of attention to recognition programs and strong communication is particularly important in larger organizations. finally, I wanted to just leave you with some of what we've been seeing about the highest impact areas driving creating a great place to work. And I think what's interesting about this is as much what's not on the page as what is. So in addition to the metrics that you've seen here, we collect metrics about work-life balance, about training and development, pay, profit sharing, benefits programs. And all of these are important. They do affect people's experiences and their intent to stay, especially even as companies get larger. But even at larger companies, they are always at the bottom of the metrics that we measure on influence on retention and creating a great place to work. Instead, qualities like those that you see here that require not just HR leadership, but also organizational-wide commitment are higher. And many of these might sound simple, but they're, I think we can tell from our own experience that they're difficult to achieve consistently and at scale. So friendly environment, making sure that people are accessible and connected with each other without avoiding conflict is really critical and takes an organization-wide commitment. And I'll also note that we've done a lot of analysis on how experiences vary depending on who you are and what you do at an organization. And we find that friendliness can actually be highly impacted by whether you work full-time or part-time, and also whether you're a person of color. You might be having a very different experience than your colleague sitting next to you. Ethical leadership, executive effectiveness is a very strong predictor of year-over-year revenue growth and is really critical to be paying attention to in your organization. And obviously inclusion, making sure that you're treated as a full member in the organization regardless of who you are and what you do is critical to creating a great place to work and really requires the collaboration of your entire organization to be effective. I just wanted to hone in quickly on the leadership component a little bit more because we know that creating a great place to work comes from the top. You need capable leadership in order to lead, particularly in times of change, and employees are going to be more trusting of executive leadership that they believe is strongly effective. And you can see in the chart on the right that we see here that strong executive effectiveness is also associated with 3 times the year-over-year revenue growth. So the way we look at executive effectiveness is we need to see that a team has emotional resonance with their company's culture and its people, as well as an ability to create coherent and effective strategy at every level of the organization. So I'm going to turn this over to Justin.
Great, thanks, Sarah. I'm really excited to be here today in partnership with SHRM, Great Place to Work, Sarah, and all of you on the call. So hope you enjoyed the first section. There were so many common themes between what Sarah discussed and what I'd love to chat about next. So at Thumbtack, we're really humbled to be named one of the 100 best medium-sized places to work in the US by Fortune and the Great Place to Work. And as Sarah outlined, a large contributor to this has been our good fortune in building a high-trust culture. So today, I wanted to share a few things. Focus on what we've done to try and build a culture of trust, some challenges that we faced, and some things we've learned along the way, and my 2 cents on what the future holds. I'm also aware of the incredible caliber of the community on this call, and I want to share your wisdom and keep this as interactive as possible. So I'll introduce some polling questions throughout the conversation so we can share your experience with your peers and also check if you're still awake. So keeping with the theme of making this session real, throughout this discussion, all the photos you're going to see are of our own team and our professionals to give you more insight into who we are and help bring you on this journey with us. But first, let's start with what Thumbtack is and what we're all about. What is Thumbtack? To answer that question, we have to take just a quick step back. So we know that technology plays a pretty massive role in our lives. It makes things easier, faster, and cheaper. But it's still so hard to hire a plumber. We look through long lists, we call a bunch of businesses, we leave messages, we hunt down estimates, we're not sure how accurate the estimates are. It's slow, and it's annoying. And it also means that we have so many projects that we never even get started on. So we've tried to make hiring local services as easy as buying something online. The Thumbtack is the app and website that finds you local professionals for any project. And what do these professionals or pros do exactly? Well, they do everything. We partner with over 1,000 types of professionals: plumbers, caterers, personal trainers, math tutors, wedding officiants, you name it. And we have working pros in nearly every county in the US. And so more than 250,000 small businesses nationwide use our app and website to find customers, which has meant billions of dollars in the pockets of our pros. This also means we've helped over 25 million customers in the US alone get their projects done. And this is the future of work. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, around 9 out of 10 new jobs in the next decade are going to be from the service providing sector. That's more than 10.5 million new jobs in the US alone. These professionals, in many ways, represent the future of what work could look like. These are jobs that can't be automated or sent overseas. And so we make technology that allows these pros to do what they do best by making sure they're getting in front of enough of the right customers. So think about a caterer. A caterer is amazing at catering and probably not a marketing expert and not probably spending their entire day sitting in front of the computer working out how to advertise for new customers. So we help them do that. Technology is at the heart of the future of work. And while it's never going to replace our small businesses and professionals, it can help them reach goals they never thought possible, whether that be hiring new employees, enabling flexible schedules that work for their families, or just turning a skill into a dream job. And this is a picture of our team moving to the San Francisco office on our first day. And our business is people first, and so is our company. So as I mentioned before, I wanted to share a few things that we've done to try and build a culture of trust in our company, as well as some of the things we've learned along the way. Because we've made great progress, but we still have so much more to learn and so much more to do. And I think about building a culture of trust really through 3 lenses. That's building a culture of trust through transparency, through humility, and through community. Now let's cover each one briefly, but let's touch on how we think about each one of these. And Sarah mentioned that they might look different for you in your own company and culture, but we're happy to share a little bit about what it looks like for us. Let's touch on the first one, building a culture of trust through transparency. I think about this as starting all the way back at hiring. At Thumbtack, we are very thoughtful and very deliberate about who we hire. And we've never dropped our hiring bar or our values fit bar just to fill a role quickly. So we end up spending a disproportionately large part of our time, our effort, and our resources on hiring the right people. Because if we do, it creates a foundation for everything else we can do with our culture. Because our firm belief is, if you've chosen to come to Thumbtack, we want you to be a partner with us in how our business grows and develops. And you deserve to know how we're doing and have a say in what we should be doing next. And this is the key. If we hire the right people, we can trust them to do the right thing, which means we spend less time trying to work out who should have access to what information, and we can trust our team to use their judgment on what information and resources to use and how. So we default to transparency. Like many companies, we say our employees are our greatest asset and we trust them. So we spend every day working hard to build and preserve this trust. But like the experience of many companies, transparency can be a scary thing. And it's by no means easy, but it's really important to us. We've made trade-offs to make sure it's a key part of our culture. A few examples of this include a bi-weekly all-hands that we hold, and we call this an all-thumbs, which includes an open Q&A with our CEO. We share all of our team meeting notes, including our functional teams, our leadership team meeting notes. We share our board meeting notes, board commentary, as well as board materials with the entire company. And we also share live product and revenue metrics internally. So every single employee can access any product or revenue metric at any one time. And on the engineering side, all of our engineers have access to our entire code base. And from my experience in consulting, transparency is one of the toughest things companies struggle with in terms of culture. And companies have either commented that it's too late for them to start, or they didn't even know where to start. And so I've encouraged companies to head down this path anyhow. It's definitely not an overnight change, but there are small things that any company can do to make meaningful progress. Depending on your own context, it can be as small as creating an open forum for people to ask tough questions to your senior leaders, or considering sharing your business strategy or operational plans more broadly than usual, or even just sharing where or when your leaders made a mistake and changed direction on something. And of course, there's some things that we can't share across our entire company for legal reasons or for other very good reasons, such as customer or pro data. But we always welcome our team's feedback on what else we can be sharing more broadly. We even share our leadership team development goals across the company. So we'll do our next round in just the next couple of weeks. So the entire company will know what each member of the leadership team will be working on developmentally. And these aren't softball development goals either. These are goals that really cut deep into the pretty direct feedback we've gotten and the true areas that we need to work on. We've been very transparent about that. Let's touch on building a culture of trust through humility. I know that fewer companies are focused on this now, but it's a deep part of who we are in terms of our culture. So I wanted to share a couple of examples of how we demonstrate this or how we work on this. So I think about humility as something that's really hard to systematize. You know, it's something that's demonstrated rather than planned and executed on. We see examples of this every day at Thumbtack, from how our employees interact with each other to the accessibility of our leadership team. For example, we don't have any physical offices within our two offices. People sit at open desks, and when our co-founders aren't in meetings, you'll often find them just sitting in the open dining area, so anyone can approach them and have a chat with them. And this goes along with our leadership team, who have a proverbial open door policy, which is actually pretty easy because we just don't have office doors. Another example is we have a Slack channel called Slack the CEO, where people can Slack our CEO questions ranging from the big, like, what is your perspective on something like net neutrality, to the sensitive, like how are you thinking about diversity and inclusion in this company, to the fun, like questioning our co-founder or CEOs on embarrassing myths and stories from the early startup days. Nothing's off limits. But humility also means being honest about decisions and being able to share when you made a mistake or explain why you made your decision, even if you decide to stand behind it. For example, there's been a few times when we've rolled something out, either to one of our offices or across the entire company, where we've done our due diligence. We've spoken to leaders, we've spoken to team leaders, we've spoken to individuals, and it also made perfect sense on paper. But when we decided to roll it out, when we actually rolled it out, it wasn't received all that well. Now, some of these times it's because it's just a difficult topic or it's a change we had to make, but sometimes it's because we didn't anticipate the response, which in hindsight was an oversight on our part. So in these cases, we've owned the outcome as a leadership team. We sat down and we said, we missed this and we can do better. In most cases, we made adjustments to address the feedback as well. So when we do roll things out now, employees often give us the benefit of the doubt because they know that we have their best interest at heart. And if something doesn't feel right, they always have a team that will truly listen. Let's talk a little bit about building a culture of trust through community. And we've worked hard to build a sense of community within our company. And early on, this meant building a community around something that we all love here at Thumbtack. That's food. And we are really fortunate. We have an amazing culinary team from Michelin-starred restaurants, and they cook us 3 amazing farm-to-table meals a day. This means at 12 p.m. sharp every day, you'll see the majority of our people come together from across our offices to share the same meal and the same experience, sitting at long lunch tables and chatting together. And our employees give so much to us, and by extension, their families do too. We want to make sure that their families feel as included in our community as our employees do. We invite families to join us for meals at any time. And in one office, we actually have what we call a family dinner once a week. But as we continued to grow and scale, we needed more than just happenstance and food to ensure we're thoughtful about the community we're building. We've been working hard to enable our employee resource groups, or ERGs, over the last year. And these originally started really as a grassroots movement. So we have 5 ERGs now in our San Francisco office, with more being launched over the coming weeks. We're pretty excited that they're now expanding to our Salt Lake City office as well. But separate from this, we also build community around thought-provoking topics and ideas that our employees care deeply about. So we often invite external leaders to come and have fireside chats with us, whether it's our investors, whether it's community leaders like the Homelessness Coalition, who's coming in next week, or thought leaders from our industry. So community's been such an important piece of our culture, and it's one that's going to continue to change as we scale, because what works when we're a company of 100 won't work with a company of 1,000. As we talk about scaling culture, one thing I'm a big believer in is being a proximate leader. I think about proximate leadership as getting close to the things that matter to our people. We can only be good leaders and understand our people, culture, and issues if we get proximate to the things that our employees, teams, and communities care about the most. Getting proximate is a key for leaders to building a great culture. And look, it's easier to do this as a company of 100 than a company of 1,000 in multiple locations. But by focusing on the transparency, humility, and community aspects of culture, it makes it a lot easier to create and enable proximate leaders. So it's really this focus on transparency, on humility, and on community that helps us build a culture of trust. And it's exciting to build and be a part of such a great culture. But it's not without its challenges, both in terms of what we're facing now and what we're expecting to face in the future. I'm really lucky to spend some time at Google where we learned firsthand how to scale an innovative and transparent culture. And what I learned was no one's got it all worked out. One of the biggest challenges I think we're facing now is avoiding culture debt. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the concept of technical debt, where in software engineering, you'll need to do a lot of rework later on because you chose an easy solution now instead of a better approach that would take longer. And it's often a very conscious trade-off that startups make. I would argue that this applies to our culture as well, where we trade off doing the right thing long-term with an easy short-term solution that requires a lot of rework later on. So I do everything I can to avoid culture debt because the path to clearing the debt is not easy. And it's often not even clear that it's possible. So I think one of the most important pieces of this is hiring the right people. It always goes back to hiring. One example is not prioritizing the speed over the quality of hire, or prioritizing hiring someone who's technically amazing but not a values fit. You know, in technical terms, they're a bit of a jerk. And this is a hard trade-off that we make every day. Another important piece of avoiding culture debt is tackling tough challenges that are easy to kick the can down the road on while you're growing, but will be painful to start later in the game. For example, career development. And it also means keeping your values alive with how you make decisions. It's easy to keep your values in the good times, But when the chips are down, avoiding culture debt means making sure you're still transparent with your decisions, even if people won't like the decision, and living true to your values. It also means doing everything you can to keep the culture alive. This picture was from a recent presentation I did at a company, All Thumbs, dressed as a pirate, obviously, where because we take our work really seriously, but it doesn't mean we have to take ourselves too seriously as well. The culture debt is a challenge I know we are facing and we're going to continue to face, but one that we're going to try and tackle head on. One of the other challenges that we face is a lot of this stuff is just not easy to do as you scale. So when you're a smaller company, there are many things that are inherently just easier to do. For example, at our All Thumbs, people used to stand up and give love-its to people as well as share could-be-betters about the things they did that week that impacted others that could have been better. That's a pretty high level of psychological safety and transparency. That's harder to do when you scale. In this context, we grew about 10 times in size over the last 3 years. And so we stopped doing that earlier this year, when our All Thumbs got much larger and people found it much more nerve-wracking to stand up in front of so many people. And that's okay, but it's not an easy thing to replace. We're working hard to embed some of this into our culture, into how we talk, how we own mistakes, and how our leaders act. At Google, this is something they did really well. Even in a company of 70,000 people, you would still have people asking some brutally tough questions at the company all hands to the company CEO, founders, and leaders each week. And they felt safe doing it. And it's because of the culture that was built from the ground up. We've made some strides in trying to tackle these challenges, and our company is still in the hypergrowth stage, so we're having to learn, adapt, and tackle the challenges of scaling a culture quickly before we build too much culture debt. For us, this means building whatever we can into a process or operating rhythm. For example, we consciously try to make sure that the gap between leadership and other levels in the organization doesn't expand too quickly. But also, surprisingly, data has shown us that cultural symbols of hierarchy can often be as impactful on engagement as the number of layers between the leader and their organization. So symbols could be having only certain roles or titles, being eligible to attend certain forums, or having access to a particular perk. So this is something that we always try and keep in mind as we continue to scale. We also try to keep our teams cross-functional, small, and nimble, because we found it's far more efficient and effective to have a few teams tackling more bite-sized problems than a large team tackling a large problem. While we're doing this, we also try to build more process transparency, because sometimes it's less about needing to have a transparent outcome, but by at least having a transparent process, people will trust you more because they understand the inputs and the outputs, and you're not trying to hide behind a black box. Also, as we scale, we're hyper-focused on looking at how to get signals from our employees in different ways. Because when we're a company of 100, it's easier for us to get a pretty good pulse on the culture than when we're 600. Which leads me into my 2 cents on the future. As I imagine the future, I'm pretty heavily biased as a big advocate and a voracious user of people analytics. I believe that the data tells me what is going on, how to act, without introducing my own bias, with many caveats, of course. But I think people analytics is not just about measuring. I think that's just the beginning. I think about the continuum on people analytics going from reporting to tracking to understanding and to predicting. So let me share a little bit about how I think about these stages while being hyper-focused on moving us along that continuum. For example, let's talk about engagement surveys. On the reporting side, it's not necessarily just about getting an engagement survey report and targeting the lowest score. For example, performance management is usually one of the lowest scoring items on engagement surveys, but some recent data showed us that people often care about it less than some of the higher scoring items. So we can work hard at tackling and improving performance management just because it's the lowest score, and look, we probably should, But we also need to be aware of the ROI that it's ultimately going to have with our employees. Move to tracking. And this is helpful to understand where you stand, help you understand where you are relative to last year or other benchmarks. I believe that absolute sentiment is important. There's so much that sits under the data. For example, year-on-year changes are a critically important signal to me because it shows that people are feeling better or worse than they were last year, and that change is such an important signal for me. Moving along to understanding, I think about this as working backwards from the answer. For example, this year, instead of looking through all of the engagement survey items, we stepped back to work out what was most important to us. And it turns out it's the retention and engagement. We did a bunch of analyses to find the drivers of retention engagement specific to our company and specific to our locations as well, as there were different drivers for each one. And this is where the Great Place to Work survey really helped inform some of our outcomes. We also ran analyses on the comments to find the best signals. So I didn't just highlight the comments I liked the most, but found the ones that were actually either most representative or most predictive of an outcome, which leads to predictive. We're only just touching the surface of what's possible with data and analytics, and only now are we diving into the world of predictive analytics and how we can better predict attrition, how we can predict a good hire, how we can predict performance, or how can we even anticipate something, what we'll need in terms of learning opportunities. This is just scratching the surface. Armed with behavioral economics, good hypotheses, and reams of data, I think we're going to see an interesting decade ahead of us in the field of people operations. I'm so excited about what the future of this field holds, and I want to thank all of you in the people operations field for driving all of this progress. And, honestly, it just makes me really, really proud to be a people practitioner. So thank you again for joining today, and I'll turn the mic back to Sarah.
Okay, let's turn to some of the audience questions that have come in, and we'll start here. An audience member asks, we've tried to do a survey of all employees to get insight, and we only had 23% participation in this survey. People said they don't trust us enough to answer the survey questions. Any suggestions on how to address this?
Well, I can take a stab at that. I think that honestly what you have ahead of you is a hard slog. It's hard work. And what I would do is start with that, start with the 23% that responded and show them, A, that there's no retaliation for the folks that provided direct feedback. Be very transparent with the kind of information you got back. Tell people we had a really poor response rate, and we think it's because you don't trust us, and here's what we want to do to fix that. And then be very clear in the survey data that you get back what actions you're taking to improve and give people progress updates. So it's only by starting from where you are and behaving in a trustworthy manner that you're going to build that trust, and you have a good opportunity there. And one other thing that occurs to me is you probably know why people don't trust you. Even without the survey, you might have some hints at that. And so you could start working on some of those actions as well as a way to build trust.
Great. And the only thing I'll add on to Sarah's answer, I love that answer. The only thing I'll add on is that I think about participation in two pieces. One is going to what Sarah mentioned, which is how do you trust the data? Do your employees trust that they understand how the data is going to be used, who sees the data, and what it's used for? And the second piece of it is trust. Do they trust that they know that you're going to act on the data? So are you honest about what you can and can't do? And do they feel like if they share their voice, that it will be heard and it will be acted on? I found through past experience that if we collect a lot of data and we don't do a good job of sharing back what we're doing with the employee voice, they're less likely to be open to giving that to us in the future.
I was just going to say, that you shouldn't feel that it's insurmountable. Companies face these kind of challenges all the time, and you can definitely improve.
If we can squeeze in one more question, an audience member asks, how can a millennial manager create a great place to work with Generation X and baby boomer employees in an office setting?
That's a really interesting question. I'd encourage you can go to our website. We had an article that we published connected to the Best Workplaces for Millennials list that we published that analyzed some of the differences between millennials and other generations. And actually, one of the things we found is that there's fewer differences than you might expect in terms of what's driving the workplace experience of those different generations. So it might not be terribly different what you need to do for those employees than you have to do for your millennials, although, for example, communication styles might be different, but people still need to have credibility, respect, and fairness regardless. One thing that I think we found is that, interestingly enough, boomers tend to be having less fun in the workplace than millennials, and also have more concerns about promotions being handled fairly. So I don't know if that's the case in your particular organization. You could survey that and find that out, but those are some things to look for. And I can also say that we've seen many of the companies that we work with have something called like a millennial advisor for Gen X and boomer leaders. So there's actually a millennial who provides mentorship to them about how they need to change their working style and what attention they have to pay in order to work with millennials. So, maybe in this case you could do the reverse and make sure that your millennial managers are having open and honest conversations with folks. I guess the last thing I'd leave you with is I'm wondering if in that case part of the dynamic might just be credibility. If your millennial managers are feeling concerned about that they're credible enough, that they're trusted enough by their employees, and I think that's another case where you need the transparency and survey data and just a practice of open and honest communication in order to turn that around.
Well, thank you. We just have a couple minutes left here. Let me ask you, Ms. Lewis-Kulin, if you have any final closing remarks for the audience.
I'd love to have a chance to tell you a little bit about what Great Place to Work. So yeah, I just want to leave with a little more information about how Great Place to Work can help SHRM professionals to build high-trust cultures. We have a bunch of data-driven tools that can measure your culture and help you focus really on what the critical metrics are that will actually make a difference in your workplace program, so you know that you're not expending effort in a place that isn't going to impact the overall culture, and also let you benchmark with the very best workplaces. We also offer recognition programs that I spoke to earlier, which gives you a platform to be recognized with your brand right up against the best companies in the world. And I'd encourage you all to come to our website to read the data-driven insights we have about building your culture. And if you're trying to accelerate improvements in your workplace or you have a specific problem that you're trying to solve, we can help advise you using the insight we have from identifying what's most successful with the best companies through our consulting practice. And for us, really the road to a high-trust culture starts with certification. So by participating in our certification program, you start to be able to quantify your culture in very concrete ways. So if you meet the certification criteria, you become Great Place to Work certified, and certified companies receive promotional tools to tell their employees, candidates, suppliers, and the community that they're a high-trust organization that's worth engaging with. And from there, certified companies have met the threshold that means that they're eligible to compete for our best workplace lists that are published by Fortune and also by People with the Companies That Care list. So winning a spot on the best workplaces list like Thumbtack has is a really great achievement. But even if you don't win a spot on the list, striving for a high-trust culture has a ton of bottom-line benefits for your company.
All right, thank you. With that, we are going to bring today's webcast to a close. We're going to close the program window in about 90 seconds. So now's the chance to download your certificate or the program PDF. Before we sign off, a couple of final thanks. First to our presenters, Justin Angsuwat from Thumbtack and Sarah Lewis-Kulin from Great Place to Work for the insight they provided today. And we want to thank you in the audience for participating and for choosing SHRM for HR webcasts. That concludes today's program.